I learned very young that Christmas wasn't about peace in my family. It was about blame. Every year, without fail, my mother would look at me across the table, between the candles, the plates, the forced smiles, and remind me that my father was gone. And somehow, in her version of the story, it was my fault. My name is Rachel Miller, and every Christmas for 10 years, my mother accused me of being the reason she lost the love of her life. She never said it loudly. She didn't need to. She'd sigh when someone mentioned him. She'd lower her voice when she spoke his name. She'd look at me like I was a memory she wished she could erase. If you hadn't stressed him so much, if things hadn't been so hard back then, if you hadn't needed so much help, always if you, never what he carried alone, never the truth. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from. Leave it in the comments. Because if you've ever been blamed for something you sacrificed everything to fix, you're not alone. When my father died, people said it was sudden, a heart attack, no warning, no time. What they didn't know was that nothing about his last year was sudden. It was drowning, quietly. My father was a proud man. The kind who believed providing was the same as protecting. The kind who thought asking for help meant failure. So when the debt started piling up, he didn't tell my mother. He told me. I was 24 when he came into my apartment one night, sat on my couch, and stared at the floor for a long time before speaking. I messed up, he said. That was all. Then he handed me a folder. Inside were credit card statements, personal loans, unpaid balances, penalties, $45,000. $45,000 of silent panic. He didn't gamble. He didn't drink. He didn't cheat. He tried to save a failing business alone, and it crushed him. I just need time, he whispered. I can fix this. My mother never knew, because he begged me not to tell her. She already worries enough, he said. If she finds out, it'll break her. So I made a choice, a quiet one. I took on extra shifts. I sold my car. I emptied my savings. I refinanced my student loans. I negotiated payment plans in my name. Every month, I paid something, sometimes all of it, sometimes just enough to keep the lights on and the calls away. I didn't tell anyone, not because I was strong, but because I loved him. And I believed if I carried it alone, he could breathe. What I didn't know was how heavy guilt becomes when it has nowhere to go. The stress never left him, and one morning, it took him. After the funeral, my mother fell apart, and I became the easiest place to put her pain. You always needed so much help, she told me one night. He worried about you constantly. You drained him. I opened my mouth once, just once. Then I closed it, because explaining the truth felt like betraying him. So I stayed silent, year after year, Christmas after Christmas. I watched her light candles for a man who died protecting her from the truth, while she punished the daughter who actually did. She never asked how I survived after he died, never asked how I suddenly paid my bills alone, never noticed the weight under my calm. She just blamed, and I let her. Until last Christmas. Last Christmas, she said it out loud, in front of everyone. If Rachel hadn't needed so much, maybe your father would still be here. The room went quiet. I felt something inside me finally give up. Not break. Release. After dinner, I went into my childhood bedroom and pulled out the one thing I'd kept hidden for a decade. The folder, the receipts, the proof, the payments, the bank transfers, the signed agreements with my name on them. I didn't plan revenge. I planned truth. 2 days later, I asked my mother to sit with me. Just us. She crossed her arms the moment I spoke. I don't want to argue, she said. I don't want to argue either, I replied. I want to tell you something you don't know. She scoffed. You've always had secrets. Yes, I said softly. Because I was protecting him. I slid the folder across the table. At first, she barely glanced at it. Then she started reading, and reading, and reading. Her hands began to shake. What is this? She whispered. This, I said, is the debt Dad was drowning in. $45,000. The debt he never told you about. Her face drained of color. You're lying, she said weakly. I paid it, I continued. Month by month. After he died, I finished it alone. She looked at me like she didn't recognize my face. He didn't lose his life because of me, I said. He lost it because he carried everything alone, and I helped him carry it because he asked me to. Silence filled the room, not anger, not denial, shock. Tears rolled down her face before she even realized they were there. Oh my God, she whispered. I blamed you. Yes, I said. You did. She covered her mouth. I punished the wrong person, she sobbed. For the first time in 10 years, she looked at me not as a reminder of loss, but as the daughter who saved him the only way she could. I'm so sorry, she cried. I didn't know. I never knew. I sat there, calm, not triumphant, just tired. I didn't tell you because he loved you, I said, and because I loved both of you. She reached for my hand like she was afraid I'd disappear. I was wrong, she whispered. I blamed you because I didn't know where else to put the pain. I squeezed her hand gently. I carried it for you, I said, for years. That night, something finally softened between us. Not fixed, but honest. And this Christmas, for the first time, she lit the candle and said my father's name without looking at me like a wound. She looked at me like a daughter. Sometimes truth doesn't destroy families. Sometimes it just stops the bleeding. If you've ever been blamed for something you sacrificed everything to fix, I see you. And one day the truth will find its way home too. After that night, things didn't magically become easy. Forgiveness never works like that. It arrives quietly, then asks to be rebuilt every single day. My mother didn't suddenly become gentle. She didn't erase 10 years of words with one apology. But she changed in the way people do when they finally see the damage they caused. She stopped bringing up my father's death like a weapon. She stopped sighing when my name entered a room. She stopped looking at me like I was the cost of her loss. Instead, she started asking questions. Small ones at first. How long did you help him? Did he ever sleep? Was he scared? Each question felt like reopening an old wound. But this time, someone else was holding the light. I told her things I had never said out loud. How my father would call me late at night, whispering so she wouldn't hear. How he'd apologize for putting me in that position. How he promised, again and again, that once things stabilized, he'd tell her everything. He didn't want you to see him fail, I said quietly. My mother cried then. Not loudly, not dramatically. The kind of crying that feels like something finally loosening inside your chest. I loved him so much, she said. And I punished you because I couldn't reach him anymore. For the first time, I didn't rush to comfort her. I let her sit with it. Because grief doesn't excuse cruelty, and love doesn't erase accountability. Weeks passed, then months. We started meeting for coffee instead of holidays. Neutral ground. No traditions to trip over. Sometimes we talked about my father, sometimes we didn't. Sometimes the silence was awkward. Sometimes it was peaceful. One afternoon, she reached across the table and touched my hand. You were so young, she said, and you carried so much. I nodded. I shouldn't have had to, I replied, but I did. She swallowed hard. I don't know how to make up for it. I thought about that for a long time before answering. You don't, I said gently. You just don't repeat it. That seemed to land. That Christmas, she asked, not told, me to come over. No accusations, no reminders, just an invitation. I almost didn't go, but something in her voice felt different. When I arrived, the house looked the same, but the air didn't. She had set one extra plate at the table. And when she lit the candle for my father, she said something she'd never said before. He did the best he could, she said, and so did our daughter. Not the one who caused everything, not the reminder, not the burden. Our daughter. She looked at me then, I was wrong, she said quietly. And I'm sorry it took me so long to see you. I didn't cry. I smiled. Not because it fixed everything, but because it finally felt real. Later that night, as I drove home, I realized something important. Helping my father didn't ruin my life. Being blamed for it almost did. Silence can protect, but it can also destroy you if you stay in it too long. I don't regret paying his debt. I don't regret loving him enough to help. But I do regret letting myself become the villain in someone else's grief. If you're listening to this and carrying something that was never meant to be yours, I hope one day the truth finds you. And if it doesn't, I hope you find peace anyway. Because sometimes forgiveness comes with an apology, and sometimes it comes with walking forward without one. Either way, you deserve to stop being punished for your love. And you deserve a Christmas where no one looks at you like a ghost. That night stayed with me longer than I expected. Not the conversation itself, but what followed after. The quiet aftermath of truth finally being spoken out loud. For years, I had carried my father's debt like a secret scar. Not just the $45,000, but the weight of knowing he was drowning and choosing to save him anyway. I never told anyone how close he was to breaking. How he used to sit at my kitchen table, hands shaking slightly as he stared at the numbers, whispering, "I don't know how I let it get this bad." He wasn't reckless. He wasn't careless. He was ashamed. Ashamed that he had borrowed money to keep the business alive. Ashamed that he had hidden it from my mother. Ashamed that his daughter was the one steady enough to help him when he couldn't ask his own wife. People love simple villains. They want debt to mean irresponsibility. They want silence to mean guilt. But life is messier than that. My father didn't die because I helped him. He died because he carried his fear alone for too long. And for years, my mother turned that grief into blame, not because she hated me, but because blaming me was easier than admitting she never really knew how much he was hurting. After that Christmas, she started calling more often. Not every day, not constantly, just enough to show she was trying. Sometimes she would call to ask about something small, a recipe, a doctor's appointment, how to reset her phone. Other times, she'd ask questions that still caught me off guard. Did he ever talk about me? Did he say he was scared? Did he know I loved him? Each question felt like walking back into a room I had sealed off years ago. But I answered honestly. Yes. Yes. And yes. One afternoon, she came over to my apartment. She stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to be there. I realized then how much distance grief can create, how it turns familiar places into foreign ground. She looked around quietly. "You did well for yourself," she said, almost surprised. I didn't know whether to feel proud or sad that she was only seeing it now. "I had to," I replied. She nodded slowly. We sat at the table where my father used to sit when he came over late at night. She ran her fingers along the edge, then stopped. "He came here, didn't he?" she asked. "All the time." She closed her eyes. "I wish he'd told me." "So do I said. For the first time, we shared the same regret instead of throwing it at each other. Weeks later, she handed me a small envelope. Inside was a folded piece of paper. Old, creased, clearly handled many times. It was one of my father's notes. Not a letter, just a few lines written quickly, probably late at night. "Thank you for not letting me sink. I'm sorry I asked you to carry this. I love you more than I ever knew how to say." My throat tightened. She watched my face carefully. "He kept it in his drawer," she said. "I found it after he passed. I didn't understand it then." "And now?" I asked. She exhaled. "Now I see how much I didn't see." That didn't erase the years of blame, but it softened them. Healing doesn't arrive as forgiveness first. It arrives as understanding, and understanding takes time. The following Christmas was quieter. No accusations, no heavy silence, just dinner, candles, and a moment where my mother looked at me and said something I never expected to hear. "You didn't steal my husband from me," she said softly. "You protected him when I didn't know how." I reached for her hand. "I never wanted to replace you," I said. "I just didn't want to lose him." She squeezed my fingers. "I know that now." Later that night, after I left her house, I sat in my car for a long time before driving. I thought about all the years I let myself be punished for loving someone, all the Christmases where I braced myself instead of resting, all the times I paid a price quietly and called it responsibility. If I've learned anything from this, it's that silence can keep the peace, but it can also keep the truth buried, and buried truths rot. I don't regret helping my father. I regret letting myself become the story my mother told instead of telling my own. If you're listening to this and you've been blamed for something you carried out of love, I hope one day the truth reaches the people who hurt you. But even if it doesn't, I hope you stop punishing yourself for being the one who stayed, because love isn't a crime, and carrying someone through their darkest moment doesn't make you responsible for how the story ends. It makes you human, and that is something no accusation should ever take from you. There were moments after that when I wondered what my life would have been like if the truth had come out earlier. If my mother had known about the debt while my father was still alive. If she had seen the nights he spent pacing, the calls he made with his voice lowered, the way his shoulders sagged every time he opened another envelope from the bank. Maybe things would have been different, or maybe not. Some people don't know how to face fear together. They survive by turning away from it, or by assigning it to someone else. For years, that someone was me. I became the quiet container for everything no one wanted to acknowledge. The money, the stress, the responsibility, the grief. And when my father died, all of it spilled out in the only direction it could, toward me. I remember the first Christmas after he passed. The house felt hollow, like it was echoing with things unsaid. My mother kept rearranging ornaments that were already straight. She kept sighing, rubbing her temples, drinking wine she didn't even seem to taste. At dinner, she looked at me across the table and said, "If you hadn't gotten involved, maybe he wouldn't have carried so much." No one corrected her, not my aunt, not my uncle, not the cousins who avoided my eyes. I swallowed my words and passed the potatoes. That became the pattern. Every year, a variation of the same accusation. Every year, a reminder that my love had been rewritten as guilt. Eventually, I stopped defending myself. Not because I believed her, but because explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you is exhausting. And so I stayed quiet. I built my life carefully. I worked hard. I paid my bills on time. I avoided needing anything from anyone. Strength became my disguise. But strength without softness turns into isolation. It wasn't until my mother started asking those questions, real questions, that I realized how deeply alone I had been. One afternoon, while we were sorting through old photo albums, she paused at a picture of my father holding my hand when I was still a teenager. "He trusted you," she said quietly. "Yes," I replied. "He did." She nodded, eyes glassy. "I didn't," she admitted. That confession hurt more than any accusation ever had. But it was honest. "I thought if I leaned on you, you'd break," she said. "You always seemed fine." I laughed softly. "I wasn't fine," I said. "I was just quiet." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something shift behind her eyes. Recognition, not pity, not guilt. Recognition. "I taught you to disappear," she whispered. I didn't rush to comfort her. I didn't tell her it was okay, because it hadn't been. But I also didn't push her away. "I learned to survive," I said. "But I don't want to live like that anymore." She nodded slowly. "Neither do I." That was when I understood something important. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give someone else. It's a boundary you set for yourself. I didn't forgive my mother to erase the past. I forgave her so the past wouldn't own my future. Our relationship is still fragile. Some days she slips into old habits, sighing too loudly, assuming too much, retreating into silence when emotions rise. But now, When that happens, I say something. Not angrily, not dramatically, just truthfully. That hurts, I tell her. That's not fair, I say. That's not my burden anymore. And she listens. Not perfectly, but enough. Sometimes, that's all healing looks like. A few months ago, she handed me a small wrapped box. Inside was my father's watch, the one he wore every day until it stopped ticking. "I want you to have it," she said. "He would have wanted you to." I held it in my hands, feeling its weight. For the first time, it didn't feel like a symbol of responsibility. It felt like remembrance. That night, I sat alone, the watch resting on the table beside me, and thought about how close I came to losing myself to a story that was never true. I didn't cause my father's death. I didn't ruin my family. I didn't steal anything from anyone. I helped someone I loved when they needed me. And that is not something to be ashamed of. If you've spent years being blamed for something you carried out of love, if your silence has been mistaken for guilt, if your strength has been used as evidence that you didn't need care, please hear this. You are allowed to tell the truth, even if it arrives late. You are allowed to stop carrying what isn't yours. You are allowed to be soft after being strong for so long. This story didn't end with revenge. It ended with truth. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough.